Hello and welcome to this LST 6282 My Language Community video. My name is Cathrynn Bremner-Brown and today I'm going to be talking about my language community, the sets of networks I have contact with, and a little bit about social identity. So let's get started. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Dundee, Scotland in 1995. It was just me and my mother at the time. Later we moved to Guernsey in the Channel Islands in 2001, where after a few years we met my stepdad. They had my brother, and a few years after that we moved to Perth, Australia in 2006. So it's 2019 now, and although I've been in Australia the longest out of anywhere that I've lived, it is also the culture and country that I have least understanding with culturally and linguistically. There's a mesh of dialects that even though we're speaking English, there are some colloquialisms and slang and terminology that is just specific to the Australian English dialect that I struggle with, but I get better as I get older. So moving on to my dialects, so I speak two main dialects, as you can see on the screen. The first one is standard British English with a received pronunciation accent. Now, received pronunciation is what's known as BBC English or the Queen's English, standardised English. It's thought of as upper class, posh English. It's not actually a widely spoken variety of English. Only 2% of the British population speak with received pronunciation, so it's not that common. My other accent stems from my Scottish roots and my dialect within the Scots, and it comes with an East Neuk accent. So East Neuk is a county on the eastern side of Scotland. Most notably, my direct line comes from a town called Pittenweem, where my father's from. It's not a Dundonian accent. A Dundonian accent is very thick and harsher to hear. It's more nasally. But I have distinct triggers with certain sounds, as you can probably pick up on. If I'm not thinking about it, if I'm speaking about it, it becomes more obvious. So my initial formation of language occurred in Scotland. So as such, there are certain sounds, like the O's and the A's and the A's and the R's, which are easier and more instinctive for me to pronounce with a Scottish inflection. There's also a lot of T-glottaling, trouble when you only read things, where we drop a lot of the T's in words. So like stuff like kettle becomes kettle, and butter and water, and stuff like that. So it's rather interesting. I was schooled in Guernsey as well. It's where I started my schooling. It also has a different accent variant dialect, so they speak with standardised British, but they have the Southern English accent. It's very similar to received pronunciation, more estuary English, but they're also very close to France, so there's a lot of French influences. Like the school I went to was Vauvert Primary School. I lived on a street called Le Petit Fontaine. So there's a lot of influences from the French aspect as well in that. Going back to my two main dialects, the RP and the East Neuk, there's a diglossia between the two accents, as the received pronunciation is perceived to be more posh and therefore the higher form of my dialects, my accents, while the Scottish is somewhat the lower form, as it's not as widely recognised as a Scottish accent because it's not as stereotypically Scottish as a Glaswegian accent or a West Coast accent. But in the same breath, you can say that about received pronunciation, as only 2% of the population speaks that, but it's perceived to be more posh. Moving on. Before I get into this slide, I'm just touching on the previous slide for a moment here. With my language formation and acquisition, I've always
now that I'm older and that I've done a teaching degree, I've realised that my language acquisition that goes in line with Piaget's schemas or schematas and the building blocks, where I hear a piece of information, it doesn't matter where I've learned it or what region or dialect I've learned it in, but it's the new sound, new word, new variant of this word that I need to say, and I will store it away as I learn it. So that's another one of the reasons I speak with such a fluidity of accents and dialects, because we're such a mishmash. Getting into the mishmash, my social identity. So I am a daughter, a sister, a lovable goof, and a social recluse. So I'm the daughter of a single mother who, it was just me and her for quite a while. Later on, she married my stepdad. They had a son, my brother, and we all moved to Australia for better jobs and better weather. I am the eldest sibling, same mother, different father, obviously, with a very large age gap. So I'm 9 years my brother's elder, which leads to very interesting situations where I have to take a step back and I'm not the parent, I'm just the sibling, and I'm not the teacher, I'm just the sibling sort of aspect there. Saying that, as a teacher, I graduated last year in 2018, trying to find relief, but I'm no luck at it, so unemployed I'm going to put that one as. So there's not a connection or a network there. Speaking of networks, but not quite, I am a child of forces brats and a medical family. So I'll get into this one in the next slide. My mother is a forces brat, and a lot of situations and social norms stem from my mother. So I'll get into that in the next slide, so hold on. Alright, so my language community. So my language community, as I've mentioned, I'm a social recluse, so it's very insular and very small. It mainly stems from two aspects, my family and my group of friends, my social peers here. So from my family, it's mainly my mother. So as I mentioned, she was a forces brat. So she was what's known as a RAF brat in the UK. So as RAF spouses, children, that sort of thing. My grandfather was an enlisted member, and as such, they were constantly moving placements wherever he was posted. So my mother and my gran tell the story that they've lived all over. They have no set permanence to a place of origin because they've moved so often. They've lived in England, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Germany, France, Scotland, you name it. If it's part of Europe on the side, on the British side, they've been there. So stemming from that, there's a lack of social ties because they're having to move so often, and very little permanence in their connections. Also, again, very insular because they're moving. It's not really conducive to creating long-lasting social ties. My gran put it best when I was asking her that they became social chameleons with having to move so very often. You have to blend in and adapt to new situations on a regular basis. So that's very much an aspect that I've picked up on as well. On my other hand, on the social network of groups of friends here, I've got a very close-knit group of friends. It's very multicultural, predominantly Australian, but there's a mix of purebred Australians with first-generation Australians. Their parents are migrants, and a lot of migrant friends who are from like South Africa and Germany, and England and Taiwan and stuff like that. Within my group of friends, we have rather introverted hobbies and tastes. So it's not very conducive to a social life. However, we do get together and play Dungeons and Dragons, which combines introverted hobbies and social role-playing into one. It's rather a lot of fun. Moving on.
stemming back to the lack of permanence and the forces brats influences, comes a lack of cultural identity, sense of belonging, and a sense of imposter syndrome when it comes to the question, where are you from and who are you? Because I've got no clear link to one specific place. I've got links to lots of places, but they're so vague. I can't feel like I can't say that I feel like I'm from any one of these places, because if somebody was to disagree with me, they have a valid point. If somebody said, oh, you're not Scottish, you've not lived there long enough, and your accent is a bit weird, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I could say that maybe I'm a Gurn, or maybe I'm Australian, even though, again, those connections are also vague and not very strong. Moving down to my accent again, received pronunciation is a generalized standard English accent, and it's not got a place of origin. It's not an innate grown language, dialect within England. It's an effect. Which links to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as I've got the little picture here. So you've got your psychological needs, your safety needs, your love and belonging, and then your esteem and self-actualization. I've always felt like I've missed out on a huge chunk of the belonging aspect within my personal needs. However, I don't think that's affected me as much as it could have as a person. I get out when I need to. I have social ties when I need to. I choose to be a recluse because I have generalized anxiety. Whether that's linked to the sense of belonging is a different question. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. Do I not have a sense of belonging because I don't have a cultural identity, or are they linked? Or because I have anxiety as a mental health thing, do I not have this identity because I'm constantly second guessing every aspect of my life? It's an interesting thought that I'll leave you on. And on that note, I am going to wrap this up. I hope you've had a lovely time, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you very much for listening.